Novelty shooters aren't a new thing. If you grew up in the 90s, you remember Doom, and you probably remember Duke Nukem. Hell, there was even a novelty shooter based on Chex cereal, and it was awesome. That's why I was so excited to get my hands on High on Life, a new shooter from Squanch Games, a studio founded by Rick and Morty creator Justin Roiland. Roiland's irreverent humor and unique characterizations of characters Rick and Morty, among numerous others on the show, have been hugely popular in recent years. But stepping from a TV series to a game with the same style can be a bit of a challenge. Gamers tend to spend a lot more time in a single gaming session playing than someone watching TV, and that could lead to certain types of humor feeling like a little much. So how does High on Life, aka Morty the Gun, the game, play out? Hey everyone, I'm LittleBobby here with 5-9 Direct, and we're here today to talk about High on Life, a first-person comedy shooter that was released earlier this month on Xbox and PC. I played the game through to the end, as is tradition here on 5-9 Gaming Direct, and I found the game full of interesting ideas and a rather straightforward story. But when combining all the ideas and comedy, did Squanch Games make something great, or is it something you should pass on? High on Life starts very simply with a video game fake out where you play as Buck Thunder for a short tutorial session. You're basically learning the controls while being worshipped by Buck Thunder's divorce lawyer, who has the same voice as Rick Sanchez from Rick and Morty. Full disclosure, for about the first third of the game or so, I hadn't set my audio to record game audio, so we're going to have to make do with the footage without game audio for certain parts of this review. After the tutorial, you pull away from your computer monitor to talk to your sister Lizzie, who tells you that she wants to have a party while your parents are gone. She does a quick line, and then you choose your character's look off of her Coke mirror. After choosing your look, you hear some loud noises coming from outside the house. Going to investigate, you find that an alien base has warped into your cul-de-sac, and the alien life forms inside immediately start smoking your neighbor. And this is where the title of the game comes from. You find out that these aliens are getting high on life. And after killing one of the invaders, you pick up a gun from his corpse that spits in your face and starts talking to you. The gun is Kenny, and he's basically Morty from Rick and Morty, but as a gun. Kenny is a Gatlian, a member of a race of sentient weapons that had their planet wiped out by these drug-fueled space invaders. He also tells you that the organization is known as the G3, and they act as sort of a space cartel, enslaving and inhaling any and all creatures they find that might get them a new high. Kenny ends up warping your house to Blim City, an interstellar space hub where you set up camp for most of the game. You then seek out the famous bounty hunter named Gene Zaruthian, who has fought the G3 in the past. You find Gene, but discover he's now homeless and disfigured from his past battles with the G3. Offering Gene a place to stay in exchange for his help, Gene moves in and sets you up with a fancy bounty hunter suit and the Bounty 5000, a fast travel port that helps you locate your G3 bounties across the galaxy as you fight your way to take out their leader, Garmantuous. As you go through the game, you meet a number of strange bosses that you must conquer using the strange new Gatlians that you find along your journey, each with their own type of fire and unique abilities that aid in combat and exploration. They also each have their distinct personality that they add to the mix. Kenny being anxious, Gus laid back, Sweyy very abrasive, and Creature very friendly and sweet. As you move through the bosses of each zone, each Gatlian will add their input to the scenarios you find yourself in, and each encounter can have different dialogue depending on which Gatlian you're using, which helps diversify the story for future playthroughs. As you move throughout the different worlds and work your way up the ranks of the G3 cartel, it's revealed that Kenny is the reason that the Gatlian's homeworld was destroyed by the G3. When this is revealed, it's at a space Applebee's, and you're interrupted by an overzealous server throughout most of your conversation. You then end up getting overrun by the G3 and you have to move your house to Gatlia, Kenny's destroyed homeworld, before seeking out the last lieutenant and Garmantuous himself and saving Earth. Kenny, still racked with guilt, seemingly sacrifices himself to end Garmantuous once and for all, but miraculously survives, and you all return home to find your parents and sister, and Gene continues to stay with your family. The story on High on Life is pretty basic. It's a simple story that follows basic story beats you'd expect from a first-person shooter in space. Aliens invade, take over your planet. You leave, ending up stranded somewhere you've never been. You assemble forces to fight the invading presence. It's eventually revealed that your closest ally has a dark secret, makes your other allies turn on him, but they all reunite and then defeat the evil leader of the opposing forces. Nothing terribly unique, nothing awful about the story at all. The story is really set apart, and what's likely going to be the defining factor to your personal enjoyment is the humor in the game. Justin Roiland has made a career out of his unique brand of humor. And as much as I'm a fan of Rick and Morty, unfortunately it did not resonate with me in High on Life. Between being constantly barraged by dialogue about every little thing you do, the humor about alien ejaculate and being defecated on by aliens to sneak past enemy checkpoints, I just didn't feel like the humor landed. It was all so in your face all the time, which is kind of Roiland's style, but it doesn't transfer well to a game format, especially for a game so long. When you're looking at like a short story, like a Rick and Morty episode, you can watch an episode, laugh, it's about 20 to 25 minutes, you have a good time, and then you're done. But when you're sitting down to play a game, you're experiencing this for 1, 2, maybe 3 or 4 hours at a time. And after that, it's going to get kind of, I don't know, just overdone. And while I'm all for a good shit or jizz joke, here they felt forced into the game without any kind of thought. And that combined with like every movement and everything you do being critiqued by the Gatlians, so like every 30 seconds that you sprinted being told that you sprint around too much and you should enjoy the scenery, made for like a complete destruction of any kind of subtlety or nuance to the humor. Rick and Morty, as over the top as it is, has nuance to its humor a lot of the time. And here we just see lazy jokes and meta fourth wall breaks over and over and over. You end up tired of it and it kind of wears out its welcome, at least for me. By the time like Gene got into the house, I was kind of over it. I will say there was one thing that actually really did make me laugh, and it was the funniest gag in the game, in my opinion. That was an achievement that unlocks during the second to last boss fight, which got a really honest laugh from me. But everything else was just like lowest hanging fruit they could get, and it was just too much too often. And if the comedy resonates with you, that's fine. I'm not going to judge you for that. But for me, it wasn't something that helped the story or enhanced anything about the game. There's also an option to turn off the gun chatter almost entirely while saving it only for critical moments of the story. But I wanted to make sure I was experiencing what the developers intended for me to experience and not turn any of that off because it was annoying me. I will tell you though, if you want to just try the game out and it sounds like the guns might get annoying to you, make sure you like select the option to limit the gun chatter as much as possible. Aside from that, the story is far from the most concerning thing about High on Life. Now, I mentioned that High on Life had some interesting ideas, and it really does. Each gun having a different type of attack means that combat is relatively varied if the player chooses it to be. Kenny kind of acts as a pistol with a special attack that launches enemies in the air, allowing for some crowd control. Gus is a shotgun who can pull enemies from afar and get them right up close to you, or pull their armor off if you have the right upgrade, which is kind of nice. Sweyy can slow down enemies. She'll also fill enemies with pins from her primary shot, and then can use a melee or a secondary shot later down the line to detonate those, causing massive damage. She also allows you to kind of snipe enemies with a charged shot, and even shoot enemies behind cover with that same charged shot. If you can't tell, Sweyy is a little OP. Thankfully, her primary shot is kind of hampered by like having a projectile with it instead of being like a hit scan. So it takes a minute to get where it's going, so you can't just kind of like spray everything down and then melee it really quickly from a long range. And Creature will send out little automated children of his that attack your enemies, allowing for damage over time that can stack with other weapons. So you can shoot out a bunch of his children and then switch to Gus or Kenny and keep firing while they're taking damage from the children. Creature's children also allow you to mind control your enemies into attacking each other, which is pretty nice. And the weapons also have other secondary uses that allow for more exploration, which turns High on Life into something of a Metroidvania. You can go throughout the worlds that you visited before after getting some upgrades or different guns, and using the special skills of the Gatlians explore new areas of places you've been. Sweyy can slow down fans, allowing you to explore vents, and Gus can create platforms, allowing you to reach higher ledges that you might not have been able to get to before. Kenny can make sure to knock around different obstacles and move things out of the way. And Creature can open up locked doors by having his children go through vents and unlock the doors because they're automated. They'll just climb into the machinery and mess it up for you, unlocking the doors that you couldn't reach before. And these are all great ideas, like I said, but it feels like it's really poorly put together in High on Life. There's a lot of platforming in the game, but your character almost feels too floaty when jumping. The gunplay is mediocre at best, and the shots feel like they have no weight to them. Right? I'm used to something like Halo or Titanfall or Destiny when I play first-person shooters, or even Call of Duty. All those games have great gunplay that's kind of missing here in High on Life. Melee attacks seem to miss more than anything I've played outside of Destiny 2, with melee attacks just disappearing despite being incredibly close to enemies, oftentimes pulling you in a weird direction, like trying to lock onto the enemy, but they end up just whiffing and they pull you over to some area that you're not even meaning to go. But the biggest crime of all is that Gus, who kind of acts as the shotgun in the game, is absolutely the worst weapon in the game. Now you can pull enemies closer, but if the enemies are further than about 5 feet from the player, Gus is effectively useless as he does extremely low damage. And you might think, oh well, you should be close to the shotgun, but I've never played a single player game where the shotgun is just as bad as Gus is in High on Life. Having a shotgun that feels bad in a single player story first person shooter just makes the entire game feel bad, right? Shotguns are meant to like do big damage up close, take an enemy out, but Gus, if you are just more than a foot away, he feels like he is shooting water at your enemies. There is also a lot of movement tech in this game. There's a big slide, a dodge dash, and a jetpack, but all of these really feel lackluster as well. The slide is thankfully something that makes traversal faster, which is helpful, but it doesn't make up for the game just feeling lower budget just about everything. The jetpack feels really slow, the dodge doesn't really move you very far so you can still get hit by enemy attacks, the slide will move you really far, but then you kind of lose sight of where you're going unless you kind of turn in that direction, which makes the slide feel a little off. The movement tech is just another thing that makes the game feel like it's a lower budget game. And I understand that Squanch isn't a huge studio, but there was just an interview with Justin Roiland where he came out and said, hey, Xbox Game Pass was great for us because it gave us more than enough money to get everything done for High on Life and ensure that we were comfortable with everything. But it doesn't feel like it here. The game, like I said, just feels kind of cheap, like they just didn't finish everything. There's no polish here. The best way for me to describe High on Life's gameplay overall is that Squanch Games wanted to make a comedy version of Doom 2016 or Doom Eternal, but they couldn't quite create a game that lived up to those lofty Doom standards. And it's a shame too, because these are all good ideas, they just weren't executed well. But aside from the gameplay, High on Life also has a lot of performance issues, and I mean a lot of performance issues. Now, the art style of the game is great, very cartoony and generally fun. However, it doesn't seem like something that should stress out my system. I have a Ryzen 5900X, 32 gigs of memory, and a RTX 3080 card. And my card was struggling so much with this game, and I feel like High on Life really had a lot of optimization issues that needed to be worked out. There were a number of times where I had extremely noticeable frame rate dips, which are extremely distracting during gameplay. That's one of the things for me that just drives me nuts. When you're in a gunfight and everything starts to chug, well, it just doesn't feel like the sign of a strong title. It was so distracting, it took me so much longer to finish this game than it should have, even though the game is only about 10 hours long if you do some of the side content. If you do everything, maybe 12 to 14 hours, but the game also had numerous times where it soft locked in one way or another, leaving me to have to reset the game completely. NPCs or objectives wouldn't show up, doors wouldn't unlock when they were supposed to. One time I had enemies that were just shooting me through the floor from a lower level of a map I was on, even though like they shouldn't be able to see me, and nowhere else in the game did that happen. I also had enemies just glitch out and do short distance teleports or move through walls, right? Just because they felt like it and the game was like, hey, you should be over here. Again, this made it feel like the game wasn't worth my time. And I get it's supposed to be a fun comedy game, but it should still function at a basic level, and there should still be a level of polish that I felt just wasn't here. Now, to the game's credit, they did release a patch on the second day that improved the frame rate issues a bit, but they were still nowhere near perfect and bad enough to be distracting after the patch. I wish this game had run better and had less issues. It wouldn't have changed the fact that the comedy didn't land for me, but at least I could have enjoyed the gameplay a little more because, like I said, I love all the ideas that Squanch used in here, but they just weren't done well, and the performance on top of the gameplay issues was just so much to deal with trying to make my way through this game. Now, as far as games go, High on Life is not the worst thing I've ever played. Far from it, in fact. It's just that it was like disappointing on just about every level. From comedy that overplays its hand and wears out its welcome extremely quickly, to general poor performance on just about every level, High on Life just feels like a title made for Xbox Game Pass. Now, why do I say that? It's simple, because like, I think that there's been a really stellar audience review that we've seen coming in from a large number of people who feel like this game is free, right? Quote unquote free. And I played the game on PC Game Pass, and I think had I spent my hard-earned money on this game, I would have been absolutely livid with the product I received. Keep in mind, with all the things I mentioned, this is a $60 game. And while it seems like through my reloads, like if I was using different weapons in different places, I'd get different lines from the different guns if I had, especially having to reload to like clear an area because the door wouldn't unlock. You can see that the guns are going to kind of increase replayability, but for me, I don't think I would play this game again unless they really tuned up just about every aspect of it. I mean, if you're someone who really loves every minute of the Gatlian dialogue and you want to experience every other minute, you'll replay it. But for me, this is like a one and done FPS comedy game that runs poorly, plays poorly, and has this overbearing rambling from its main characters disguised as comedy. And if you played it on Game Pass and enjoyed it, that's great. If you played it on Game Pass and didn't, you feel like your money wasn't wasted at least, right? However, I feel like if Squanch Games is asking for $60 for this game, that is borderline criminal considering everything wrong with it that I've laid out here. At $30, I'd say you still want to be watching like the first hour of gameplay to see if the comedy gets on your nerves first before purchasing it. However, if this game was $20, I'd say, you know what? Okay, $20 I can deal with, like, it's a $20 game, right? I expect a certain level of quality out of a $20 game versus a $60 game. And if I'm paying $20, I'm a lot more willing to put up with bugs and poor optimization than I am at $60. Again, I'm not saying that High on Life is the worst game I've ever played, but it's also definitely not worth more than a single playthrough as part of your Game Pass subscription at this point in time. If Squanch went through, tightened up the gunplay, tightened up the melee combat, made it so enemies didn't teleport around, made it so that the frames didn't drop quite as often on PC, made it so that like the movement felt better, right? They could go do like a whole tuning patch, and I'd say, hey, yeah, now this game definitely could be more fun. But for me, it's not something that I see as being anything other than just a Game Pass title you play once and you kind of are done with it forever, and you probably won't think about it again after that. But that's it for our review of High on Life. What did you think of the game? Did you play it on Game Pass, or did you buy it for full price? And if you did buy it for full price, what did you think of it? Let us know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching today. I'm LittleBobby with 59 Gaming Direct, and I hope to see you soon.